Hi, welcome to this week's episode of the Wellbeing Show. I'm Noel, I'm your guest. I'm not, I'm your host. There you go. I got my sentences confused in my head. And my guest is Richmond Stace, who I've known for many years and is returning to the show after having sort of burrowed himself into a book writing hole. And he's emerging bleary-eyed, blinking into the sunlight of post-book, having written it. Don't want anything to do with it anymore. Thank you very much. Light of day. That one. Welcome back, Richard. It's really good to have you. How are you doing?
Very well. No, it's great to be back. Great to see you. We were just catching up before you pressed the record button, working out when it was. It's been a little while. So no, it's great to chat.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to see you, and we'll catch up in London when I'm back. So I should introduce you. Richmond is a pain specialist physiotherapist, and quite a unique set of approaches, in my experience anyway. So as opposed to sort of the biomedical model only, he also incorporates a sort of psychological approach, which is, in my experience, quite unique for somebody with your background, which is so we've worked together in the past. That's how I know Richmond is, having worked. He's been part of my team and service in the past as well. We've worked with people, mostly because these sort of pain medications can become a problem. So we've worked on that side of things, getting people off pain medications into ways of managing pain. I mean, there's quite significant statistics on pain and the number of people who have chronic pain, which is really what we're going to talk about. And I'll ask you about those stats in a short while, because I'm sure you know them. I mean, I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's quite.
Yes,
You can.
it's bad. It's very bad.
Yeah. And we have, pain clinics in the UK, which in theory will be looking at other ways of managing pain, such as mindfulness, etc. And we'll talk about all of that. But tell me a bit, like, how did you get into the, as it were, the healing field in general? What was your sort of background? Where did you come from?
Well, it's a pretty convoluted route actually. I trained as a nurse originally, and that was a real eye opener because I went, I went to a boarding school, and that's a particular way of life. I was lucky; I had a good time, but it's not always the case. But so that's pretty closeted from the real world. And so when I went to train as a nurse, I mean, that was like, wow,
Yeah,
gosh,
imagine.
going on here, and I just loved it. I just really found something. A real kind of passion for healthcare, not necessarily nursing per se, but that was just the sort of the vehicle at that time.
Yeah.
And I just remember I just went and did everything and anything I could. I got totally absorbed in it. I mean, money was a bit tight as a student, so I was a nursing auxiliary, as it was called then. I think it's healthcare assistant now. So I would do numerous shifts a week and on the training. So I was just totally immersed in this whole world, which I found fascinating. And I was involved from the very basic care right the way through to other things, the more technical side. So that was really the beginning, and I got interested in pain there. And I remember I did my final project on pain, and was sort of couldn't really work out why people having similar operations would have such different experiences. I mean, that was just strange to me. And of course now totally understandable, but then I was like, very black and white. What's that all about? And then I went off and did another degree in sport rehabilitation and sports science, because I thought, well, maybe I'll go down that route in terms of healthcare work in the sports world. And that was good fun, but it was a bit of a struggle to sort of do anything. I found some quite good positions, but nothing that really was fulfilling me. So I then went and did the physio degree, and that was all right. Fairly underwhelming in the whole, apart from meeting Mick Thacker, who's been a friend and mentor ever since. And he was into pain and introduced me to some of the modern pain science stuff in a lecture. I can still remember it, and grabbing him afterwards and going, oh, wow, this is it. I'd sort of done a full circle, because it was really, there was a real sense of the whole person again, and holistic,
Right.
in a scientific kind of way, but a person, a person first kind of way. And I was like, whoa, that's it. And then Mick set up the masters at King's College, where I was doing physio in pain science and society. And I was like, well, I've got to do that. And I spent a couple of years with him doing that. And that was in the early 2000s. And I've not looked back really from then.
What was it? I mean, that's really early on, sort of, to be interested in pain. I mean, what was fascinating? Can you remember what was interesting you about it?
I think, you know, because there was so much struggle with sort of helping people who were, you know, if it wasn't something more acute or very straightforward, where perhaps the pathology, injury, that kind of thing was slightly more related to the pain. These people that were really stuck. And I remember I'd had the interest before, so I was kind of into the field and the literature and the learning and going to meetings and lectures and things like that before I did the masters, where I really did a deep dive with Mick. And I ran the pain management thing at the NHS where I was working, and that was great because I could kind of run that material. I mean, this is years ago now, but and the practices, it was pretty basic when I look back now, but nonetheless it was well informed at the time. But it was frustrating because now, you know, I'm sure we can do better. I'm sure there's other stuff. And really it's a matter of time of you know, the research and different thinkers coming into the field, kind of blend of philosophy and science that we have now that sort of emerged. I mean, that's probably been more of the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's just become more and more possible to help people in more and more ways.
Right.
So it's a really exciting field. And but what's really important is I think there's great hope. You know, we can be much more positive about the messages that we give to people about things they can do, you know, whether it is coming off medication or whether it is strategies to learn to live better, to try and overcome pain. And I openly use that sort of terminology now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it's interesting. So I'm going to ask those straightforward questions that other people might have in their mind. So pain isn't just pain. It's not just an objective fact, as it were. I guess there must be objective sides to it, but you're suggesting that there's other sides to pain which are to do with the individual, not to victim blame or anything like that, but that the stuff as an individual you can do, which isn't just about your biological response. Is that right? Am I getting it right?
Yeah, oh, completely. I mean, the question, what is pain? I mean, no one can really answer that yet.
Okay.
Bizarrely, as it might seem. I mean, everyone kind of knows what it is, as in, it hurts. You know, if I'm in pain, I'm in pain. I know I'm in pain. But actually...
Well, it's interesting because when I work with people who have opiate dependency, they mix up pain completely. And there's no division between an emotional pain or a cut, for example, a physical cut that causes a response. It's pretty much the same thing. And part of the psychological work with opiate withdrawal, for example, is to teach people the difference between the two. But I guess you're saying that the crossover is quite significant between the two.
Yeah, and actually, the predictive processing model, which is probably the predominant lens I come through, and I can explain that briefly in a sec. Some of the guys doing the work, Mark Miller, for example, has done work coming through that lens, looking at, he hasn't actually looked at pain particularly, where we chat about it, but addiction and depression. So these sticky problems that humans get stuck with and then really struggle to kind of update what's going on. And you can start to see that there's some real similarities in some of the characteristics of what's happening. So, I mean, you can almost think of any problem that someone gets stuck with, there's going to be some sort of commonality, but in a really unique way. So, the science of pain, forever people are trying to find out, what is specifically going on biologically, which means that you're in pain. But nothing's been found that's specific. Regardless, there is nothing yet. I mean, there might be, but they've looked and looked and looked, and there's been various models that have, labeled line and particular parts of the brain. But as we stand right now, there's no pain centers. There's no pain signals, there's no pain nerves, no pain receptors. There's nothing specific to pain.
So we haven't found the actual biological circuitry. Like, for example, we know something about the circuitry of fear. It's in the amygdala and stuff like that. And certain bits of the brain light up when we're afraid, and certain physiological processes happen. We've got a thing called the threat mechanism, we've mapped that out. You're saying there isn't something similar for pain mechanisms as such?
Well, I mean, I can't comment too much on fear because I haven't looked at it in the same kind of depth. But I would imagine it's a similar kind of problem that, you know, to see something lit up, you know, when people do the fMRI studies, to look at what's going on in the brain, what becomes more active, less active, and then you get all these nice sort of coloured pictures. We've also got to remember that when that's published in a journal, you know, that's gone through a whole load of processes to really try and show something. So we have to look really critically at what we see. But some activity in the brain, you know, we don't know how that becomes or what that becomes. You know, I suppose what we know about pain or fear or hunger or thirst or love, you know, these things that we really feel they are lived experiences. We really feel those things, and and there's a quality, there's a range of qualities. So, you know, pain can be described there's hundreds of words that people use to describe their pain. So fundamentally, each experience of pain is utterly unique, even in the same person. And that's, I mean, largely because each moment is unique. You know, each moment is fresh and new. So if I have pain now, that's a different experience to having it in 10 minutes. So there's such idiosyncrasy. There's such variety in what's going on and what people feel.
It's fascinating. But I mean, I want to come back to that, but I also want to come back to the predictive model. What did you call it?
Yeah, so PP, so predictive processing, predictive coding. It's a model that's been used, I mean, in a broad range of fields, and it's a way of thinking about brain and mind and experiences and perception. And really what it speaks of is largely people will say the brain, but other people now are expanding that to take in other systems. You know, the division between brain and body and the world is showing to be much more sort of fluid and porous than it might appear. And I think this is the problem in many ways, is that things appear like the world appears to us, and there is something out there, but only I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. So my systems are somehow generating my experience of me and the world.
Yeah.
And it feels real. Of course it feels real. I mean, that's it. I mean, in essence, that's really all we have is experience. I don't have.
I think of it as filtering. We experience something through the filters that we have, and those filters are reinforced or challenged depending on, because there is an objective reality, and it either confirms, but we can also make decisions to confirm or deny. We know that because through cognitive behavioral therapy, that's what we do. We teach people to not be depressed, to deny the depression and move on to something, for example. And it's that type of thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's the closest to that is the potency of prior experiences. So what the model is saying is that what you're experiencing right now is your systems or your brain's best guess to explain you and your lived world right now, but based on what's happened before. But there's also this kind of weighing up. So in other words, because of everything I've experienced, my systems will generate this. So there's a prediction made. And then the sensory information coming from the body will either confirm that, and if it does, great, enough, you know, we feel fine. Your body's kind of invisible in terms of pain, that's for sure, or transparent. You're not really noticing it. There's no bodily doubt or like a crack in the window. But if something happens, you have an injury, so this is obviously more acute pain, then that creates a different flow of sensory information that's expected. So you've got an error in the system, a mismatch, a prediction error it's called. And that we feel. I don't feel a prediction error, or, you know, no red light that goes or anything like that. I just feel pain or thirst or something else.
Whatever it is, yeah.
And then what we seek to do in a way is to minimize that error. So we do something, you know, I have a look, oh yeah, that's okay, give it a rub if I bang my elbow, and that minimizes the error, and then I feel better. So that's kind of what it says. Now, when it comes to a more sticky problem, what seems to happen, and this is going to be quite a mean
sticky, meaning a problem that hangs around as opposed to something else.
Yeah, so your chronic pains, your depressions, your addictions, that kind of thing, is that, you know, your systems are predicting something, like getting better. So I've had this back pain for X amount of time. I expect to get better. And that's subconscious expectation as well, because I've been well perhaps all my life, or for most of it, or whatever. And then I'm not getting better as I expect. So I've still got this pain. Now, that might be because my expectations are that I should be better now, when actually clinically you probably should still have, or it's reasonable to still have pain. Or maybe the treatments haven't been very helpful, or maybe this is quite a common one, been given quite a few inaccurate messages about don't do this, don't do that, protective, oh, be careful, worry. Or, there happens to be quite a lot of stress in my life, that kind of thing, or I'm not sleeping well, or maybe I have a poor diet, which has impact on the microbiome and levels of inflammation. So for that and a zillion other reasons, you're not getting better as expected over and over and over. And then what seems to happen, and using Mark's term, there seems to be this sort of nasty switch where your body systems go, well, hey, we haven't got better, so maybe this is it. This pain is it. This is the best explanation. And the systems can quite easily disregard information coming in that might be saying, hey, you're okay.
Yeah.
You're largely okay. It's using the priors of pain, the prior pain experiences, and weighting that more than what's happening here. So sort of turning that into, well, how do we help people?
Yeah.
Well, we have to try and create evidence by gathering new sensory information that's going to start updating that prediction, kind of get unstuck, in other words. And a really good example of that, which is not really available yet, of course, is with psychedelics. And there's a lot of work being done on that, which seems to jostle these sticky beliefs in the system. And these are not beliefs where I'm saying I believe in this, that, and the other. These are beliefs in our systems that have been sort of built up over the years.
I think of it as automation, the sort of body mind that you alluded to is expert at automation, because automation makes life easier. Except when it automates something that's unhelpful. And
you're kind of running a bad
right.
or a bad set of predictions. I mean, I think we're talking about similar things, just different terminology. If you're running a bad pattern, but a bad pattern could be, in terms of someone who's into gaming, and so they game and they game and they game and they game, and because they're getting the rewards of the game, they actually get this full sense of doing well in life. Meanwhile, everything else is falling apart. The pizza boxes are building up, and relationships are falling apart. You haven't gone to work, you're not sleeping, but you still feel you're getting a kind of some sort of reward here because you're on level 93 now, or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you then started to get involved in these models and understanding pain as a holistic approach, but also as an interpersonal approach. And you were doing this as a physio. I mean, did other physios just think there was something weird about you when you started?
I think people do think I'm weird. Yeah. I've been called Darren Brown. Maybe I look
a bit like him, so I can see.
I had a beard.
I can see similarities. But you got essentially interested in this stuff, and was this in your practice? I mean, were you in hospitals at this point, or were you in private practice? Where was this sort of deep interest beginning to emerge?
Oh, this goes way back. I mean, but it was far more basic back then. I mean, the way that I talk about it now and think about it now. But there's been lots of other influences, and the coaching side, is a heavy influence from Mike Pegg. So he's another sort of great, being a great mentor and support in what I'm doing. And he's the sort of pioneer of strengths-based coaching really in the UK. And still.
So tell me about that element then, sort of how that fits into your overall sort of model of practice.
Well, I mean, I coached cricket to youngsters from when I was about 18, maybe a bit younger. I was big into cricket, and I got into coaching and did coaching qualifications and loved all of that. And it just kind of dawned on me that the way I was working with people was kind of quite coachy. And so I kind of started to explore that. And I used to go to all sorts of conferences that had nothing to do with pain or healthcare. I'd be the only physio in the room by a mile. I remember, but I was at this one that was all about change in organizations. And it was actually one of the mums at the school that my kids were at, and we were chatting about stuff. And she said, "Oh, you probably quite enjoy this because it's all about sort of strengths and identifying strengths in people." I thought, that sounds cool. So I went along, and it was brilliant. There was lawyers and change people and HR and leaders and all that sort of stuff. And this guy called Mike Pegg stood up and gave a talk, and I was just blown away by his approach and just the way that he did it. And I nabbed him afterwards. And you know, we've been in touch ever since, and yeah, he's been really influential in my approach. But I would say that it goes beyond what I do with people. These are personal philosophies about how you go about things. I mean, he calls himself a positive encourager, so I've really adopted that way, and I just can't imagine Mike being anything else other than that, a positive encourager.
So strength-based coaching is, tell me about that, what that is for you, how you understand it.
So for me, it's seeing a person. So it's you know, very Carl Rogers as well. So it's you know, the unconditional regard, seeing a person with strengths, with a positive history, an autonomous being who will make decisions. I'm not there to fix people or tell people what to do. I'm there to be a guide on the side. I nicked that phrase from someone. I kind of liked it, rather than a sage on the stage. I'm not into that. You know, it's coming alongside someone and guiding and encouraging, advising at the right time. So, I mean, one of the, if we want to call psychological approaches, I probably wouldn't call it that actually. Motivation interviewing is a big sort of part of the style, and I'm quite heavily into that. Along with sort of compassion-focused therapy, that kind of thing. They'd be the sort of psychological things that I've done. A fair bit of, and lots of positive psychology stuff as well.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I tend to think of, we have a health system in general in the UK and maybe globally, modern health systems, modern sort of industrialized, I think of them as health systems, tend to have a deficit-based culture. You have to have something wrong with you to get services. And that's like it's a perverse incentive to be ill in some ways. And certainly in the sort of mental health field, it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. Yeah. And trying to get people into much more of a strengths-based or asset-based approach. And again, even in things like asset-based approaches to community development, for example, if you think about people with addiction problems, if you've got 10 houses on a street, this is the model they usually give you, and 3 of them have people with addiction problems. The old deficit-based model takes the person out of the house, treats them, and moves them somewhere else. But in the asset-based model, what you do is you keep people in situ, you give them skills so that the whole street can see them change and improve. Yeah. And there's potential, and then that asset stays within that community, as it were. Yeah. And it's that type of practical, pragmatic, and philosophical approach that I think that works for me as a practitioner and works in what we're doing. Is it along those types of lines, I guess, that you're talking?
Yeah, very much. I mean, it is looking for the possibilities, not problems. You know, opportunities over obstacles. I use those kinds of phrases to encourage people. Yeah. Focus on what you want in your life, not what you don't. I mean, classically, you say, when you say to people, what's your picture of success? Well, I want to get rid of this pain. I say, okay, I totally understand that. But if you run with that as a goal, all you're doing is thinking about your pain. That's like saying, don't think of elephants. What do you actually want? Well, I want to get fit and well. I want to walk the dog. I want to go on holiday. I want to play with the kids. You know, whatever it is. Sometimes it might be I want to make a cup of tea. Sometimes I just want to get myself dressed without having someone help me. You know, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. And the person is always further down the line than they think they are. Yeah, it's kind of shining the light on that, and then, you know, in practical ways, looking at things they can do to build towards it, realizing that it's a process. You know, not every practice is not the end result, because I tried that a couple of times, it didn't work. Well, that's like picking up the guitar and strumming it twice and then wondering why you can't play Led Zeppelin. You know, it's a learning journey, right? And you have to be, and I'm very overt from the beginning about that, and say things that initially are not very popular, like you've got no control over outcomes or results, because you don't. And if you take that on board now, you're not going to continually be disappointed by the fact that you can't. And people, what do you mean? What do you mean? Because we're so results driven, aren't we? Of course you can I can get results that I want. No, you can't. No, you can't. It's like a football team saying we're going to win 3-0.
Yeah.
Well, hold on a minute, there's another team there. How do you know? So there's, you can have goals, obviously, things that you're working towards, but remember where you are now. You're right here. And of course, no one wants to be where they are in that situation. They want to be somewhere else. And that's one of the basic causes of suffering. So, the acceptance piece and understanding where you are and trying to be realistic, keep your expectations aligned with the reality. These are all skills, day-to-day skills, which we can work on.
Yeah. So somebody comes in to see you and they've been through a pain management clinic, and typically how might they present and what sort of services and what sort of things are they getting already that you then want to sort of look at with them?
It can be such a range, and I think this is one of the issues, isn't it, for people, that they try this and then that and then that and then that, and it's all kind of stepwise, isn't it? So someone might have a series of injections. Everything's very focused on the physical, if you want to call it the physical, although I don't believe in that dualism at all. I think that takes people down the wrong path. And then, oh, well, that didn't work. Well, you better try some psychology. And then they get to some point where, and that could be months or even years, where they're sort of told, well, there's not a lot else that we can do.
Yeah.
As if that's it, as if all that person, or if it's very medically based, as if medicine is the only thing. And I say to people, look, medicine definitely has a role, or can have a role, but it's quite small at this point now. If you've had all the tests, you've had all the drugs and all the interventions and whatnot, and I'm not anti those things. They can have a role, they can be helpful, but they're only a small piece of the pie. Because if you're taking medication, it takes a second to take a pill. If you have an injection, you go and have it, and then you go home. The big bit is, how do I live? What do I do? How do I get around? How do I go back to work? How do I, whatever it is, that's the massive chunk. People are awake for 14, 16 plus hours a day. How do you live? Nothing in medicine teaches you that. So the massive chunk is kind of always left out, when that should be the first bit, really, or certainly alongside what's happening.
And so somebody might turn up, I guess, sort of really quite debilitated, and their outlook is quite negative. They're probably quite depressed about everything that's going on. So they turn up, and then you're going to start an assessment. You're going to get to know them as a human being, get something of their history and stories. Is that the way it works? Or are you waiting for the GP to send you some notes through the post or something like that?
No, I mean, people obviously send letters when they refer, and I haven't glanced through, but I'm just really interested in the person. I'm very curious. We're in that, really privileged position to listen to someone's story, often of woe, all sorts of things that people have been through. And actually, I try and then point out, how much resilience they really have to have gone through those experiences
and still be kicking. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're there today.
Oh, and when someone comes along to a session and they're there, obviously dressed, and they've got there, and I say, well, what have you been? I can't really do anything. I say, well, hold on a minute. You've got from your home to here. You're dressed, you're showered, you got makeup on, or you whatever. That is an achievement. And so many people don't realize that, because there's that part of them that's sort of going, well, I should be able to do that. Why shouldn't I be dressed and there? But that's not acknowledging the circumstances. So it's getting people to acknowledge, and of course they don't want to, or I want to avoid that kind of thinking. But until you accept where you are, your start point, it's very hard. But the first conversation is very detailed, as in they're just talking. I let them talk and tell their story. Pretty much everyone goes, well, it's a really long story, I hope you don't mind, that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, that's it. That's why you're here, to tell that. So sometimes in the first session we don't get to a sort of an examination of, but that the examination, certain bits are obviously important, but it sort of shows me how they're embodying these experiences. But of course it changes all the time. So when we meet next time, there's no reason why it shouldn't be quite different. An hour later, it could be different. So this idea that, oh, well, let's measure how much you can lift the arm, put that in the notes, great. For this kind of for these kinds of situations.
I'm guessing it's like listening to you. I'm thinking there's no way I can bring this guy down. He's always going to be coming at me with something positive. And I'm imagining that's such a radical shift for people coming into your practice, because the thing about chronic conditions is that they don't just affect the individual who walks into your room. They've affected everybody around them. So there's, in many ways, they're getting this feedback loop, aren't they? Which is reflecting their pain in the broadest sense, but they're sort of locked in state, as it were. And the people around them are locked in as well. And coming into your office must be quite a challenge, actually, because you're just not going to buy into that at all, are you?
No, I mean, I like to think that I come across, as I really try and listen hard, and come through that compassionate lens. But of course, compassion has to have wisdom as well. And so I'm trying to hold up a mirror on the.
I was going to say, you're holding up in that psychoanalytic sense. You're shifting the mirror, aren't you? You're shifting the way somebody might have. You're not going to be that part of the pattern. You're shifting the pattern for them in the way that you're being, right?
Yeah. No, I don't want to be, and it's quite tricky because someone tells you something, you want to empathize, and you do empathize, but you don't want to do it so much that you're sort of reinforcing that, because what I'm trying to get to is the point where they're sort of coming up with things themselves, their own kind of change talk, as you would say in MI, for reasons to be thinking about things differently or doing things differently. And I think that when we get into
that's quite a difficult one to find, isn't it? To sort of be from the off, empowering people, when actually they may just want rescuing, and you're not going to do that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're spot on that. And that again is where you need to be, really present. You got to be you got to notice what's happening there, because if you start picking up on that, then that's a whole different sort of scenario. And I guess this is why it's so complex. And I guess this is also why I have a real worry about the types of people who work with people who experience chronic pain, because it's a real art. And I'm not saying I'm the absolute expert on it by any stretch, but I have dedicated myself in a really obsessive way for many years, as have other people as well. But I know that there's so many people experiencing chronic pain who go and see a whole range of people who I'm sure really want to help, but it is a really specialist field. And we need much better training and supervision for people. I mean, in your field, supervision is I used to love coming to the supervision type meetings. I'm not sure you called them that, but those meetings where you got together and people could, in a safe space, talk about what they were doing, and people can share their ideas and that sort of thing. I mean, I just think that's so important for learning and development. You can't keep it all.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, I think, and what I'm hearing you saying is something around the relational nature of what your patients are experiencing. And actually, I think one of the issues about a biomedical model, again, I'm not against a biomedical model at all, but it does tend to cite the problem in that individual body. And rarely is the problem in that individual body in these types of issues. Because I guess what you're suggesting and what I'm hearing you say is that pain isn't just about what is happening in your body. It's about what's happening around you in your lifestyle choices. It's present in your relationships with people inevitably, and present in the people trying to provide you treatment and the modalities that they operate in. And all of those things are locking you into the pain, and you're just not aware that that's what they're doing. And somehow you need to be unlocked, and you've got a key that can unlock and help people and teach them the skills of maintaining that unlocking. But it does come back to this notion, and while I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, but pain is, I'm the one who feels it. It's me, isn't it? But it isn't, of course. It can't possibly be just me, in the same way that I absolutely know that when I'm depressed, it's not just me. I absolutely know that. Without you, there's no way you can convince me of anything else, but I'm still want to tune into this idea that pain belongs to me somehow, which is odd, isn't it?
Well, I think just the way that it feels and the way that we have the experience, as we said right at the beginning, it just feels that way, and it sort of intuitively feels that way. And because we've all been brought up in the sort of biomedical model, and had so many of those kinds of experiences, even having studied it and worked with people for years, if I had a leg pain for the last few weeks after doing some running up hills when I haven't fully recovered, being a bit stupid. But, and, even knowing all this stuff, those thoughts come. I mean, I'm lucky, I know what to do with them and I know what to do. But they still come. So it's not a case of, not having those thoughts. It's about being able, because you can't stop thoughts. It's about seeing which are useful and which aren't, and that takes presence and awareness. You might call it mindful practice or meditation practice, which I do think can be really helpful to learn about the leanings of your mind. Or someone like me, how do I think? Yeah, that's how I think. All right,
yeah,
that's the way my mind goes. I didn't choose my mind. I just I didn't even choose to be alive, but here I am, and that's the way my mind kind of works. What can I do to sort of shift that a bit?
Yeah.
Well, I can practice these things. But again, I'm lucky that, I've got a system that's fairly flexible and will update in that way. We're talking about people whose systems may not be so flexible, and for a bunch of reasons, including, prior traumas, which I'm not saying that everyone who's had a trauma, because I guess everyone I would say has probably had some kind of trauma, but I wouldn't hang everything on that, but nonetheless they've got a long story of living to that point, which has been shaping all of their systems and how they generate. So there it is. It's, although it's, you might, in your words, it's not necessarily their experience of pain. There is an experience of pain which is embodied somewhere. It's always real, but it's also embedded within their world. And
I mean, it's a really important point. I mean, I think that neither of us are saying that these things are made up. There's really something really happening. But the way we experience that reality, we can have an input onto it. That's the odd things that we have as human beings. We have this capacity to have an input onto how we experience reality. And I'm not talking about an undergraduate degree in philosophy about am I alive or am I on an operating table? So I mean, it's not that nonsense. But we have shown it with clear evidence in psychology, for example, that the human beings filter, manipulate, play with their experience of reality all the time, and we can use that to our benefit. It's not a bad thing. It's a really useful skill that we've got. We started from the age of 3. We can turn this battery into a flying saucer if we want. We have creative minds that can do things like that, so it's a great skill that we have. And in a sense, I guess what you're saying is that creativity is being warped by these experiences, and in my terms I would call it maladaptive defenses as opposed to adaptive defenses. So things that no longer work for us. So thinking of trauma, for example, is a good example. I think when we have early adverse experiences, we may have adaptations to those adverse experiences in the way we think, in the way we behave, in the way we relate to people, in what we do, and crucially, what we don't do. Often it's about aversion is the great sort of thing. And pain would be part of that as well. Pain in some senses, like put your hand on the fire, you won't put your hand on the fire again, is the type of thing that people talk about. But often the work is about stopping those maladaptive processes and allowing people to be fuller and more flexible in their responses. Not to say that they don't have pain or they don't have depression or they don't have a memory of a traumatic event, but that they're not rigid in the response to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And if we think about that in terms of a whole person, so a body, a mind, a brain in a world, first of all, you've got lots of different ways of coming at that, from movement to meditation to learning, in that kind of way, and creating new patterns. I mean, the definition of madness, I think it was Einstein, was he said, you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result.
Yeah.
But we all hold on to stuff, then we keep doing it. We all do it. We know people who do. They keep doing that same. Why do you keep doing that and so you're not getting the result that you want there? Why don't you try something different? Oh, really different? And again, that sort of shows through the conversation. You can find out, how flexible they are, how open they are when you start discussing their, what do you think is really happening here? And then they might be really hinged on some sort of physical explanation. Oh, it's my disc. Oh, it's a joint. It's arthritis. And then I sort of drop into the conversation the fact that the tissues of the body, so muscles, bones, cartilage, nerves, tendon, fascia, ligament, they don't have the ability to produce pain.
Okay.
And they go, what do you mean? Well, you're telling me you feel it in your back. Well, what's there? What's in your back? Well, all of those things. Well, those things can't produce pain. And they go,
right. Okay.
So I say, well, if you're in the cinema, can the screen produce a film? Can the screen generate a film? Well, the film's up there, isn't it? Yeah, but is it generating it? Well, no. It's coming from there, and then it was made in Hollywood, and we also need a cinema and a sound. Yeah, there's a lot more to it. So the film is really there. It's on the screen. The pain is really there. That's where you're feeling it. It's not in your head. It's not in your brain. All those messages still out there. There's kind of a big swing from it being, your pain's coming from your disc or your back to now it's coming from your brain. Neither are true. It's being generated top down, we could say.
Yeah.
As a best guess to explain what's going on for you.
Okay. I get that.
To the PP model. And that's kind of where you've got a bit stuck, because your systems are predicting pain in certain situations because you've had pain in those situations in a notable way many times before. So the weighting of evidence sort of says that's the most reliable explanation for what you're experiencing right now. We need to create some other evidence here.
Yeah. And the way I'm thinking about it, sometimes I explain to people these unhelpful patterns is a bit like if you're in an airplane and the autopilot is set to crash into the mountain, it's going to crash into the mountain because the autopilot is just on. And so you've got to switch that autopilot off and start navigating differently. And it seems to me you're saying something similar to that we've got to find a way of interrupting that automated autopilot signaling. And part of that methodology is to understand that don't obsess about where the pain is, because that is, you can just go, okay, that's where the pain is, but now I'm going to do something totally different. Whereas pain sort of does say to us, come and look at me here, because this is where I am.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and particularly some, more neuropathic type pain with your CRPSs, but it doesn't have to be a particular condition. And of course, some people have pain because they have condition, an autoimmune condition or an inflammatory condition, which means there can be a lot of errors coming up in the system when there's cycles of inflammation that need to be dealt with. So, you might need different strategies to deal with that. To say someone who had an injury or an accident and they're still in pain months or years later. So in other words, again, it's this whole, you need a totally individual approach for each person.
Yeah.
And plus there might be some similarities. The formula, if you like, I'm sure that's a great term, but what you do is going to be completely unique, but totally focused on that person and what they want to achieve.
Yeah.
And the thing about pain, of course, that we haven't mentioned yet is that there's a real prerogative for survival in our systems. There's two main priorities. One is survival and the other is procreation. All of our systems are designed to support those things. Not to do the stuff that we love doing and to fiddle around on phones and all that sort of stuff and stress and work long hours and not sleeping and all of that. The systems aren't designed for that. So there only needs to be a smidgen of evidence that something threatening to you as a whole. So, sometimes quite often, if someone is in this kind of state, when they're stressed or tired or not feeling good, their pain is worse, and they're like, well, why is that?
Without
there's kind of a chemical basis to it, you could probably argue, but by and large it's because there's some kind of perceived threat to you as a whole. There's that phrase, isn't there, which sort of implies it's a bit in the head, but it's sort of, most of your worries are under your hat. In other words, it's the way that you're thinking about it. So the way that people relate to their pain because of the way they believe, what they believe, and their kind of knowledge base about it, is just the key that's either keeping the door shut or going to unlock it. And it was interesting you mentioned about, when the pain's there and you feel it in some part of your body. Yeah, you can sort of maneuver your attention away, depending on intensity and level of skill of you've practiced, sort of thing. But there's also something about being able to sit with it at the right time. It's not something I'll do straight away, because when you examine your own experience of pain, you often realize it's not actually what you thought it was. It's certainly not what the story you've been telling yourself is. There's much more dynamic and change and fluidity to it. And actually, although when you first put your attention there, because tension works like a volume switch, it often goes up, it then usually comes down.
Yeah.
That for people is like, whoa, wow. So actually it changes just by paying attention to it. Yes, it does, because that's what happens when you pay attention to something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Change.
Absolutely. I mean, counterintuitively, that's what we do with anxiety, for example, is we ask people to go towards it, not away from it. So exposure therapy is the core of treatment of anxiety. I mean, the way to think about it is sort of, if you think about, you have a phobic response to spiders, which doesn't make any sense in the UK because they can't really hurt you, but you can imagine they can. The exposure work that you would typically do around that, graduated exposure to the thing that you're afraid of, means that you overcome the fear. And I'm guessing a similar type of process is happening there. And also it's making me think about sort of deep meditative practice is a bit like that as well, isn't it? About sort of staying with an experience and not sort of running away from it. I mean, we'll put aside things like flashbacks and trauma and stuff like that, and that's a very specialized area of work in terms of helping people reprocess experience. But again, even there, in all the reprocessing work with trauma, like the memory track reprocessing that takes place, it is about going back to the event, the memory in your mind, and reprocessing it by moving it from left to right hemisphere if you're doing EMDR and stuff like that. So all of that seems to be connected. What it's making me think of, all of this conversation, is I'm thinking, if I was somebody who's tuned into this not knowing Richmond Stace, I happen to know Richmond Stace, so I knew how this conversation was going to go. But if I was somebody coming into the conversation thinking, oh, we're going to learn about pain, and then I'd be confused to some extent by the conversation, and enlightened and helped and all these things. But at no point have you suggested, right, here, take this prescription and this will sort your pain out. Because what you're suggesting with chronic pain is that is woeful, that approach. It doesn't work. And that you can waste a lot of your time on trying to make those approaches work. That actually, what you're suggesting is this sort of Copernican shift that happened in psychological therapy is when we moved away from thinking of mental illness as a sort of chemical soup in the brain to understanding that it's something very different, that it's interpersonal, it's situational, it's philosophical, it's behavioral, it's lifestyle. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to do in terms of health and well-being, in terms of managing mental illness, etc. And even in the hard realms of psychosis, which is the cause célèbre of medical diagnosis of mental illness, even there the guidelines are shifting and nice to, we need more trials, they're saying, but we're looking at psychosocial interventions and how they work, and sort of getting those, and even thinking about them on acute wards, for example. Again, this is quite radical stuff, and I've got a feeling that other physios listening to you might just be going, what's he talking about? But I think of, and this is, and I've always had a deep admiration and respect for physios, because physios save people's lives. And when I used to work inpatient, for example, the physios would be the people that actually save people's lives. Forget everybody else, because you would die from what the hospital did to you if the physio didn't intervene, right? That's sort of like, that's what would happen, literally. But I've always had this sort of deep respect for the profession and how it moves and works with people. I remember a physio I went to see when I had frozen shoulder. Now, of course, typically frozen shoulder means an injection, biomedical approach. And this guy said, no, we want to try something new with you, Noel. And he taught me 2 stretches, literally.
Yeah.
2 stretches to my shoulder that did that and did that, which I've later learned you do in yoga all the time. But he gave me a towel and taught me to do that. And it was gone.
Yeah.
After 6 days of doing those stretches, which was really quite extraordinary to think that he empowered me. He gave me a simple tool. It might not have worked, but it actually did work. And that approach, I think, is magical. In the biomedical model, to bring those types of approaches in. Just to put you on the spot there a little bit, could you give me a sense of the range of techniques that sort of people might learn from you if they come and see you? Are we talking about mindfulness, relaxation, nutrition? What sort of stuff?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, it's always tailored to the person. So this is very, very general, but there's kind of different themes that I follow. One is obviously helping the person understand their pain. So we'll talk about it using their story and example,
knowledge and learning.
Absolutely, because you've got to understand it really to move forward and to engage with some of the things that we might do. Then there's going to be specific things they want to achieve. So I want to go back to work. I want to walk the dog. I want to go traveling. I want to
setting life goals, and not about obsessing about the pain, right? Okay.
Yeah, and then we will design specific practices and exercises and strategies to do that around movement, and then exposure, if you like, to doing those things bit by bit, working within the window of tolerance, setting the bar low, keeping your expectations and reality aligned. So there's a lot of self-coaching strategies that I teach them to use whilst they're doing it. That's all the unseen work behind, because someone, when you write a medical legal report or something and say, well, now they can bend over and put their stuff in the dishwasher, they're like, oh, whoopee, great, is that all he's achieved? You're like, well, that actually took about 6 weeks to get him to do that because of all the massive body of work that we've done to get to that point. And by the way, that translates into putting his own trousers on, putting his socks on, picking stuff off the floor, normal things that you are able to do without thought, but he couldn't. So all of that, so specific things that people want to achieve. Then there are skills and strategies to deal with the inevitable ups and downs. It's a bumpy road, it's an unlit path full of potholes and all sorts of traps. So how do you deal with that? How do you surf the waves? So we look at a bunch of strategies around that. Then the skills of being well. You mentioned well-being. Particular skills around sleep, perhaps around diet, general exercise, that sort of thing, but also things like your outlook, being able to focus. These now are deemed to be skills of being well as well. Connecting with others, relational. How do I talk about my pain to people or not? How do I involve my family and what can they do to support my ongoing journey? Which is, I mean, I say to people, look, it's much more akin to learning a musical instrument or a language than anything else. This is a learning process.
So there's a complete shift in the person, the way they're thinking, the way they're organizing themselves, how they're setting goals, breaking goals down into sort of manageable tasks and building up the habits, the healthy
habit formation. Absolutely. Patterning the day, periodizing the day, bringing in ways to manage your energy and how long to do it for, and then how to recover, how to recharge with breathing or with movement or mindful practice, lots of breathing techniques. And then the fourth main theme is living your life, being able to make best decisions about, well, shall I go out or shall I do this? Because, they might be practicing their strategies or their exercise or whatever. That doesn't take that long. And you try and get them to weave it through the day, not load it all at one end. That's a classic. People do all their stuff and then carry on with the same patterns and then wonder why nothing's changing.
So that fourth strand is really interesting, because I'm forever saying to people that mental health is not the absence of mental illness. Mental health is having a good life. That's what it is.
Live.
Do you know what I mean? You really have to.
Is the best painkiller.
Absolutely.
If you're re-engaging with the stuff you love, I as you probably remember, I love music. I love live music. I love fiddling with my guitars. I have music on all the time. Love it. It gives me massive energy. So, I sort of bring it up with people. I say, would you listen to music? It's amazing how many people say, I like music, but I don't listen to it anymore. Well, why not? Tell me about the music you love. And then they start feeling good. And you say, well, go and put it on. You know, one of the biggest ways of making your life better, of getting better, is by doing the things that you love doing.
Yeah,
but people just don't know how.
Without a doubt.
So we look at the how, the know-how is a massive part of all of those themes. How to live the best life. And I know it's a bit of a trite phrase. People go, oh yeah, well, I'm trying to live my best life. I'm trying that. But people, yes, they want to, they know what it is, they know why, they just don't know how. And that's a big part of what we do, is the how.
That's a beautiful place in which to stop. As you'll notice, it's getting dark where I am. James is going to kill me because I should have lighting on, but I was a bit caught up in the conversation to go and put them on. So I'm enjoying the fact that it's sunset where I am, and we've been talking about living your best life, which is the best cure for everything, to be honest. And that's the whole point. You've just you just finished writing a book. What's it called? Show me the title. So
it's called Understand and Overcome Your Chronic Pain. There it is.
Brilliant. That's out in December.
That's what it's going to look like. 1st of December, that'll be out. You can.
Right. How do people get hold of you, Richmond?
I'm all over social media. So I'm on Twitter at Pain Physio, on Instagram at Pain Coach. Slightly different, but I post on Instagram every day, and it's all about this kind of stuff, getting the information out there.
Do you have a website as well?
Yeah, website's just my name, richmondstace.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. That's those places.
Great. I've really enjoyed catching up with you, Richmond, and I'll sort of when I'm back in London next week, I'll give you a bell and we'll catch up in real world, as they say, IRL. So you stay there. Listen, folks, it's been great to be back with Richmond. I shall catch up with you all next week. I think we've got Mike Delaney on as well, who another sort of blast from the past for me. I'm looking forward to having a chat with him. Anyway, it's been great to see Richmond, and I hope you all have a great week in between. So good night for now.